Shall we now delve into the horrors of the flesh and blood of the killer in the dark? This story was submitted to me by Jay. I mentioned on your YouTube channel that I would send you one of my mini stories of true events, and finally completed this one. Having to balance my time in writing with all the other things of life has delayed me a bit in getting it done. This is one of the many, many things that have occurred in my life. Some involve actual demonic events. Some are just uncanny. Some are not supernatural at all, but just creepy. Like this one. This may need to be edited down. If so, feel free to do with it what you will. The Celtic part of my heritage has the tendency to meander on for days, enraptured by the act of writing or speaking as a virtue of its own. When I was a child, about 10 years old, my parents would occasionally take me to a place in the West End where we lived, called Kittyland. It was a small amusement park, although in my own eyes it was enormous, as all things which overwhelm the sense of a child. There were 2 roller coasters, a tilt-a-whirl, 2 sizes of Ferris wheel, and a combination coin arcade and snack bar. There was also a man-made lake in which parents with their kids or young teenagers on dates could rent a real boat and move around the marked lanes for a 10-minute ride. And that was one place which terrified me one night, but that is not the focus of this story. Besides the boat ride, the only thing in the park which I was not overly fond of was a funhouse called The Laugh in the Dark. The unassuming exterior was plain corrugated aluminum adorned with 2 giant wooden clown faces, one smiling, one sad. People would give the elderly man at the gate their tickets, then climb into the small cars, each of them holding only 2 people, and the man would move the large, red wooden handle that started the adventure. The interior special effects were decidedly low-tech, but again, this was in another era, so at the time the operators simply used what they had. After the little car went through the hinged red doors, there was utter blackness for a few moments. After the eyes adjusted, a sudden eruption of sickly green light above revealed a giant spider, perhaps 2 feet across, which seemed to be dropping down from the roof toward the car. The light then went out and the riders passed through a face-level tapestry of rubber strands, like large rubber bands, which gave the effect of feeling that one had just stumbled into the web. The car would sit there for about 30 long seconds, then lurch into motion again. The tracks on which the cars traveled seldom moved more than 20 feet in a straight line, before stopping for the next fright, then jerking the passengers sharply left or right into the pitch black again. And even if there had been no scares, the rough, twisting ride in the darkness would have been quite disorientating and uncomfortable. And, of course, speakers within caused the aluminum walls to reverberate with hideous screams, growls, whispers, the sounds of chainsaws, and so on, as the cars passed briefly lighted scenarios of monsters eating their hapless victims, more giant spiders, a chainsaw maniac. The ride was actually pretty good value for the money, as it went on for over 10 minutes, and seemed much longer. My friend and I were alternately scared silly and amused by the kids in the car behind ours. They were twins, 2 little boys about 10 years old, and every time that a fright scene appeared, they would scream almost hysterically. I could never understand why, but screaming as loud as you could was apparently part of the fun. The ride would not allow kids under 10, so it was obvious that nothing would be so horrifying as to truly traumatize older kids. Even the chainsaw guy never stepped anywhere close to the cars. He just waved his saw overhead and red lights flashed, screaming at the riders that he was going to turn us into furniture. It was scary, yet also exhilarating, in a strange way. When the ride was over, and my friend and I were climbing out of our car, the car behind us came rolling out of the exit doors, but one of the kids was babbling and crying and acting like he had lost his mind. But we noticed that the other kid was not in the car. Now, there were no real doors on the cars, just little half doors that you would step over to enter or exit. And we were afraid that the child had fallen out on one of those tight, twisty turns. But the boy who was crying kept saying, "Jerry, Jerry!" And the parents who had been standing by the gate rushed over to him. My friend and I had already stepped out through the gate and were too far away to see what was going on, but the obvious conclusion was that the child named Jerry must have fallen out of the car and either become lost or, worse, injured by some of the mechanical drive chains or gears which lay under and beside the tracks. Within a few minutes, a police car and an ambulance had arrived, driving down the narrow little streets and walkways that passed through the park. One of the policemen went inside of the funhouse with a workman. The other was trying to both calm the little family and to keep spectators away, warning everyone that if they did not move away, they could be arrested. My father had arrived, and he spoke with one of the bystanders, and then with the older man who operated the controls for the little cars. He ushered my friend and I to the car and explained as we walked that the child had fallen out of the car, but he was going to be all right. Yet as we climbed into the back seat, even through the closed door, we heard such a scream as we had never before heard. Apparently, the poor mother of the injured child. Being as curious as most boys of our age, my friend and I watched the news on TV and listened on the radio for days after, but nothing was mentioned about this. It was like it never happened. And that fact, to the boyish mind, meant that something was being covered up. After all, such a story would ordinarily have been covered repeatedly, and it would certainly have had as much coverage as the local reports on social activities like the upcoming bingo tournament and the summer reading contest at the library. But we did have one option which held promise. The older boy who lived a few houses away from me, Patrick, was always proud of the fact that his father was a police detective for the Brompton Police Department. After a bit of cajoling, we persuaded him to talk to his father about this. He gave it his best effort, but his father was adamant that it was nothing that he needed to be concerned with. Still, Patrick also fancied himself a bit of a detective, and when his father brought home his brown leather briefcase each night, Patrick would wait until his parents were otherwise occupied and stealthily open the briefcase and look through the files and papers within. And sure enough, he found a case report on the incident at the amusement park. We saw him the next day and eagerly asked if he found anything. He had a strange, almost vacant expression. He had copied down the details from his father's case file. The child, Gerald Hames, 9 years of age, had indeed been found in the funhouse. His body was pressed into a space near the back, where the maintenance tools were kept. His throat had been slashed so deeply that the knife had hit bone, almost severing his head. His right eye had been cut out, and his pants and underwear removed. His genitals had been hastily cut off. The report said that it was done crudely, and that the weapon had apparently been a large kitchen knife or hunting knife. There were no suspects at the time of the report. This story was so disturbing that we all felt almost nauseous, and we talked for a long time about how and why such a thing could happen, as nothing like that had ever happened in our town. It haunted us for some time, although we did not tell anyone else about our secret knowledge, since we ourselves were not supposed to know. But just before school started that fall, another event occurred, and it created a puzzle which has never been solved. The local papers mentioned only the barest of details, that a worker at the amusement park, a young carnival worker previously from Gibsonton, Florida, had been arrested in connection with the murder of a child. Period. But my great-aunt, who lived in Tampa, sent my parents a newspaper from their own town of Tampa, and I saw the paper before my parents got home from work. The story was on the front page of the paper, as Gibsonton was a short way from Tampa, and so the people were interested in the connection to the winter area where the carnival workers from all around the South gathered to spend their off-season. Thomas Ware, formerly of Gibsonton, had been arrested in Brompton, Alabama, in connection with the murder of a young child. Police would not disclose what information they had received which led them to identify him, but a private investigator who had been hired by the family gave a number of details to the reporter, which the police would neither confirm nor deny. Ware had been traveling with carnivals for several years, and was generally considered a transient, as he never remained in one area for more than 6 months. He seldom associated with fellow workers, and was described as a loner. Not much more information was known about his past, but when the police found him in a boarding house near the park, he offered no resistance, and only laughed in response to the questions, and even the hardened homicide detectives were unable to cope with what they found in his room. 9 large, quart-sized mason jars were lined up in his closet on a shelf, beside a pair of candles in glass holders, one red, one black. Inside the jars were 9 pieces of dismembered genitalia, and 9 small eyeballs. There was also a wooden-handled butcher knife, the blade over 8 inches long. Ware refused to speak about them. He was tried and found guilty on the first case, the murder of the Hames child. Before police could follow up on any of the other body parts, he killed himself in prison with a shard of glass, and with that, the investigation was closed. As I said, this may be entirely too long to be of use to you, but I hope it will be interesting regardless. The locations are accurate, although I used the name Brompton rather than Birmingham. But I did alter the names, as I feel certain that some of the people whom I mentioned are definitely still living. Again, I have numerous encounters with the macabre, the bizarre, and the supernatural, some of which I would never discuss, and not many of them have happy, creepypasta conclusions. But sometimes, truth is a hard thing. If you wish to hear anything else from me, please feel free to contact me. I will, of course, continue to follow your channel, and indulge myself by mentally wrapping myself in the warm velvet folds of your voice, and I wish you well in your ventures. Sincerely, Jay. I looked for this story online, but didn't come up with anything. Does it sound familiar to any of you? If it does, you can email me at pennydreadfulmoment@gmail.com. I would love to know if there are more details to this horrific killer. And my dearest Jay, do you ever wonder what stayed his hand in that moment? You were just a car away. Why not you? What unseen force saved you that night?